This video has been a long time in the making. We've been back for several weeks, but it took me a long time to sort through the footage. I wanted to take you along every step of the way, show you clips of the different places we visited, and also show you how I worked in my art journal while on the trip and also when I got home. So let's start at the beginning. I'll take you to Berlin, and then we actually took a bus to Munich and spent the remaining nights in Munich. So it was a whirlwind. Things didn't always go to plan on the trip. There were these moments where things were jam-packed, we were late for tours. I think our tour guide was a little new to guiding tours in Germany, but it was a really wonderful once-in-a-lifetime trip. So without further ado, I'd love to take you along on this trip and show you how I worked in the art journal. So we just got into Berlin, and this is a little room tour. Very cozy. I'm very grateful for single rooms. We did a red-eye flight, so it took us quite a while. The bathroom is really nice and clean and tidy. I love my new toiletry case. It's just really nice. So here we are. On our first morning in Berlin, we got up bright and early and headed to a place in the city called Mauerpark, where we participated in a street art workshop. We were led up a hill to a series of walls where there was a lot of artwork, tags, paintings. I particularly liked this really detailed painting of a face.
Teachers graffitiing a wall.
The street artist that we were working with had outlined the lettering of our message ahead of time, so all we needed to do was fill it in, and he taught us how to do that in a series of steps. We were all laughing because the street artist was a bit eccentric. We understand that street artists need to keep their anonymity, but the artist we worked with had his entire face covered up, and he kept telling us that he did not want to be photographed from the front, from the back, or from the side, over and over. And we were not taking pictures of him. He also said one of my favorite lines. He said, "You can listen to me and it will look good, or you can do what you want and it'll look like crap." And he didn't say the word crap. We were all chuckling. It was a fun experience, and the mural actually turned out quite good. So here I am using Posca pens to document it in my art journal. I worked on this page partially while we were on the trip, on the bus ride to Munich, and partially when I got home. And I loved adding just this little photo in the center of me actually spray painting the wall. After our street art workshop, we walked through Mauerpark and came upon this huge flea market. It was so cool because there were just these huge cardboard boxes full of all sorts of different items. Our tour guide said we had a little bit of time before our next tour, so we had time to walk around and look through. Not enough time for me, but I did find a few different things. I got this beautiful etching by a Danish artist called Axel Holm from the late 1800s. And so here I am creating my flea market page. Honestly, I could have spent all day in there. If you do go to Berlin, I would recommend checking out this market. I also got a beautiful, tiny little etching, kind of winter scene by an artist whose name I couldn't quite read. I'm still investigating that one. I got a couple of small string bracelets, one for me and a friend, a hat because I was freezing during the street art workshop. Honestly, I could have bought so many more things. I'm so glad that I got the 2 small etchings that I did because the artwork was particularly beautiful at this market. If I had a larger suitcase, I would have gotten a few more pieces. After the flea market, we headed to the Neue Nationalgalerie, and I was excited to see a show I thought was going to be up here that focused on pre-World War I and World War II painting and the new objectivity movement. But boy, was I wrong. When I got in there, it was all post-World War II to present contemporary art, which is fine, but I had planned for the other show, and so my students were a bit confused. We did see some wonderful pieces, though. This one in particular was really moving to me. This is a piece by a Soviet artist named Boris Nemensky. It was painted in 1961, and it shows 2 young soldiers on the battlefield laying close together, one Soviet, one German. It's called On the Nameless Height. There were also some beautiful paintings by Gerhard Richter. I personally like his more realistic paintings. And this amazingly massive oil painting. I did not take a picture of the didactic. I wish I had. I saw a photo series I recognized by the artists Hilla and Bernd Becher of water towers, industrial structures. And this was actually a photo series I studied in graduate school. So it was neat to see them in real life. The cafe and the upstairs spaces were absolutely beautiful as well. For my art journal page, I decided to focus on these water tower photographs that I added some watercoloring to back in my hotel room. I also really loved these altered photographs that were part of the Gerhard Richter exhibition, and I decided to do a similar technique using Posca pens, using some of the photos I had printed out prior to the trip. So I just took a little bit of Posca pen paint, let it pool onto the photograph, and then did a drag down to create that effect. I really feel like this page captures the mood of the museum and the pieces that really stood out to me. And I also included a little bit of a Hannah Hoch piece that I really was hoping to see. I really love her collage work, but the Dada exhibition I was looking for actually wasn't on display. So this is my finished Neue Nationalgalerie page. One of my favorite parts of the trip was this bike tour that we did all over Berlin. I was surprised by how fast-paced it was. I did struggle in the beginning to keep up with the group, and I kept losing them. I definitely kept losing the leader, but it was really amazing to see so much of the city in such a short time. We learned all about the history of the Berlin Wall and visited various sites where there were markings from where the Berlin Wall had been, and even got to look through a piece of the wall that was still preserved.
To rival places like Rome and Paris, and so commissioned this sort of stuff. That's quite clearly the 19th side of the building right here and looks like this. This square has seen every era of contemporary Berlin history of the late 1930s. And these buildings, don't be fooled, these buildings are not anywhere near as old as you think they are. And we've already
We visited the Reichstag, and that building was really impressive. I loved seeing the transparent dome and the metaphor for government that it represents. We also saw this really neat contemporary building. I'm not sure what it's called. At night, we headed to the East Side Gallery. I'm a little disappointed we didn't get to see more of the murals by the light of day, but all in all, it was a jam-packed first day, probably our busiest day on the trip. When we returned to the room, I did a lot of art journaling. I had purchased a East German coin at the flea market, and so I used it to create some rubbings that I collaged into the page. I added what I learned in German for get on the train and get off the train, which I had heard over and over when we were riding the subway that day. And I just created a page to kind of encapsulate the busyness of Berlin and learning about the Berlin Wall. On our second morning in Berlin, we were given some time off to have a slow morning. Our first tour wasn't until 11, so I went for a walk along the river and found myself under this beautiful willow tree in this lovely little park. It was so peaceful and nice to just see people going about their morning business. I also found an adorable coffee shop and got myself a little coffee. I was so surprised that everywhere you went had oat milk. I was really excited about that. And then I met up with some of the other teachers and we went for a walk together. My colleague had heard about a store called the Ampelmann store, and this store was really neat. It was in this little alcove, and it was so fun to just see all the bikes lined up. Berlin is such a biking city. And the store is inspired by the crossing signs in Berlin, which are called Ampelmann. And they were actually the East German crossing signs. And so when the city was reunified, they decided to keep those crossing signs throughout the city. So it's something really unique to Berlin. I made this little page of my morning walk. I used the rest of the Hannah Hoch postcard that I got at the Neue Nationalgalerie, and I wanted to put this light green paper in to kind of symbolize the willow tree. And I just did some rubbings while I was out on that walk on the sidewalk. And so I pasted those in and just wrote some things that I noticed while I was in the park enjoying my coffee. I also made this page about the store that we visited. I purchased a few things, a t-shirt for my dad and a really cute little crossing guard outfit for my son that he absolutely loves. I kind of wish I had bought more. That's my only regret. I was feeling kind of rushed and I wish I had gotten myself a t-shirt, especially because at the time I didn't know the significance of the little figure. And now that I know, they had these really cute small bags at the store and I asked if I could have one, and they just gave me one. Also, the receipts were really cute, so here I am just putting everything together on the page. We then visited the Jewish Museum in Berlin. The architecture of this museum was like nothing else that I have ever experienced. Here is some clips of going through the Garden of Exile, which is an installation that is outdoors. And I didn't do a ton of filming at the museum because I really just wanted to experience it. The museum's architecture is at times very isolating and very imposing, and that is on purpose. It really is not only a place to view art and historical documents about the Jewish experience. There were many opportunities in the museum to listen to music and to be alone with some very heavy feelings. I really have experienced nothing like this museum. I highly recommend it. It is something that you have to go through to really understand. After making my way through the museum, I came to the cafe and sat down at a table and noticed this beautiful shadow coming from a vase of flowers that was on the table. So I used that as inspiration for a small watercolor painting. I created this gray color to mimic the texture and color of the concrete that was throughout the museum. And this was really a nice moment to just kind of collect my thoughts after being confronted with a lot of emotions and information and even a lot of beauty. There were a lot of beautiful things in this museum as well. I continued to work on the page after we returned from the trip. I used the brochure to add some scenes from the interior and exterior of the museum. I added the gray watercolor paint and one of the artworks I had seen, as well as some text to remind me of the experience. We then headed to the Olympic Stadium, which was the site where the 1936 Berlin Summer Olympics were held. It was just wild to see the track where Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals and set a record that would not be broken for 48 years. It was a very vast grounds, and we saw some statues and actually sat in the stands looking down at the track. We saw the Olympic torch. And so here I'm creating a page using some rubbings I did from the bleachers when we were there and just putting together some of the photographs and elements from the brochure. The following morning, I went on the same morning walk along the river, and I just spent some time taking in all the sights and sounds, knowing that it was our last morning in Berlin. I did not at all feel ready to leave, but I also felt really excited to head to Munich. The drive to Munich took us a really long time. I looked out the window and I really thought the entire trip that it looked just like northern Louisiana. So I have family in Monroe, and I've done the drive from Dallas to Monroe several times, and the landscape, the shape of the trees is literally identical. The only thing that reminded me that I was not in Louisiana was when we stopped for food at a gas station cafe, and we're served the most delicious, fresh, and healthy food in a very clean and peaceful environment. That is definitely not like any gas station cafe in Louisiana. Just in case you don't think I'm telling the truth, here are some actual clips from the trees in Monroe. So heading there, I did try to do some art journaling. I got a little bit nauseous from trying to draw while the bus was moving, but it was a fun trip to chat with colleagues and also to just enjoy my playlist. I was really happy that one of my teacher buddies shared a playlist of popular songs in Germany. I wish I had time to visit this friend. She lives over by Lake Constance in the south of Germany, but it was just a bit too far and our trip was absolutely jam-packed. So I will have to find my way back here. Here I am doing a painting of some of these trees using the dried coffee powder. What do you call that? Dehydrated coffee, I guess. And this was actually something that they gave us at all the hotels. I've tried some of it. It's actually really good and it makes a wonderful painting material. So here I am just painting in those trees that remind me so much of the American South, but actually are part of Bavarian landscape as well. So I worked on my page when I got back from the trip and just recorded some of my favorite songs from my German popular music playlist. Everything about arriving in Munich at night was magical. The music from the performers in Marienplatz, the buildings, and just the ornate architecture all around us. We definitely knew we were in a different part of Germany. After dinner, I went and sat right in front of Frauenkirche, or the Church of Our Lady, and just enjoyed hearing the church bells and the scenes around me. There is this really neat seating area, almost like a pit in front of the church, and some students and I just sat there taking in the scene around us and enjoying the night. We got back to our rooms very late that evening, but it was totally worth it to just walk through Marienplatz and to get our bearings in this new German city. So here I am making my art journal page for that first night in Munich. I am putting in some photos and also this photo of the grate that I thought was so interesting that I saw under our feet. I'm also painting in the background this kind of dark blue and writing with white gel pen on top of the photos and adding some stars. I actually woke up very early the next morning and we only had a little bit of free time, so I tried working out how to ride the subway on my own. It was quite easy, and I actually went back to Marienplatz to see it during the day, and honestly, the magic was gone. It was just loud and bright and nothing like that first night. The following morning, we went to the Alte Pinakothek. This was a museum I was really excited to visit, and right off the bat, I saw these wonderful portraits by the Renaissance artist Giuseppe Arcimboldo. I teach about these paintings quite often over the years, and I often have my students do a self-portrait assignment inspired by this artist. He was the court painter of the Habsburg court, and actually a few of my students were with me when I came upon these portraits, and they immediately started talking about that lesson we had done together. This is one of those moments where it's just so special to travel with your students, and it was really fun to see their excitement in seeing these portraits since they had learned about them. I also got to take a closer look at this famous Albrecht Dürer portrait, and I was really amazed by the high level of detail in the beard hairs. I know, kind of random, but it was impressive. Dutch still life is a genre that I find fascinating. These paintings are more than just simple still lives. They're filled with symbols like rotting fruit to remind the viewer of their mortality and urge them to repent or face damnation. Pretty intense. Part of our museum scavenger hunt was to find the scariest babies, and here were the ones that I found. I made my way through the more modern section of the museum, and I actually didn't do any filming in there, but following our museum visit, we did have some free time for lunch, and I found a gluten-free bakery and was so excited. I actually ordered one of everything in the case. So I stuffed my backpack full of all sorts of different baked goods, including a pretzel, which I was really hoping to be able to try while I was in Germany. Here I am in the cafe doing a little bit of work in my art journal, and then I completed these pages at home. I wanted to show the art kind of bursting through the museum and included a few pieces that caught my attention, including my ticket, which has this wonderful portrait by Albrecht Dürer that I was so impressed by the beard hairs of. This is my final page. I used some red for the background because that was a dominant color in the gallery walls. And I found that really interesting because I'm used to more of a white-walled museum, but it really did work for these more classical artworks. We then visited the Dachau concentration camp memorial. I didn't do any filming there. I didn't feel like it was appropriate since it is a resting place of so many individuals who lost their lives in really horrific conditions. Our tour guide told us when we were getting off the bus to keep in mind that visiting Dachau is an immense privilege that few people around the world get to experience, and to carry that experience with us as we go out in the world and in our interactions with others and the way we see global events. I thought this was a wonderful way to frame the experience for us. I'm not going to say it was easy, but I think it was a really important experience. On our last day in Germany, we woke up bright and early and started making the drive to Neuschwanstein Castle. Now, this was a highlight of the trip that many students had been looking forward to, and so there was a lot of excitement in the air as we boarded the bus. The drive through the countryside was really beautiful, and I was again struck by how much of the countryside reminded me of home in the United States. There were definitely moments where I felt like I was back in the Pacific Northwest, and although the buildings were much larger than the buildings you see where I live, the construction was similar and the weather was really similar. So as we drove along, we listened to our German playlist part of the time, and we also listened to our tour guide start to tell us a bit more about the Bavarian king who was the occupant of Neuschwanstein Castle, and it was his dream castle. And so we learned more and more about him. I will tell you more about his story later. It's actually quite a tragic story. When we got to the village where the castle is, we had a few hours to walk around, get lunch, and check out some of the local sites. One of the most beautiful spots in the village was the lakeside. This is Lake Alpsee, and it was so beautiful and clear and green, and you could hear the spring birds chirping. and the sun was starting to peek through the clouds and the rain, and it was just a really peaceful moment. We also hiked up to Ludwig II's starter castle, which I'll point out a bit later. You can see it better from inside the castle. We had lunch at this wonderful German restaurant, and I held up the pretzel to my face to get a picture, and that wasn't actually beer in that mug. We were not drinking because it was a school trip, but it was actually the vase that was, or the container that was holding our silverware. So I just took the silverware and held it up for this photo. So I'm making a little watercolor painting of this photo on vellum. I did a tracing with my Micron pen, and then I turned it upside down and painted the back with watercolor. That way I didn't risk making the pen run or bleed. So that is why it is backwards in this scene. I went ahead and printed out a photo of Lake Alpsee when I got home and used these gold photo corners to put it in my book. And I loved these wooden doors that were in the front of the restaurant. And so I did a little painting once again using the dehydrated coffee crystals as my painting medium. And I just kind of built it up in layers to get that motif, and then created some texture in the background to resemble wood grain. It was such a lovely, peaceful afternoon, and I think the kids needed that time just to relax after a busy trip. As I mentioned earlier, the story of Ludwig II is really quite tragic. He struggled to fit in with the expectations of Bavarian royalty of the time, and he did a sort of self-imposed exile into the countryside. As I mentioned earlier, he did build his first castle in this same village, but as the years went on, he set his sights on this higher location to build what would be his final residence, Neuschwanstein Castle. So if you look down that little yellow castle on the right-hand side, that is his starter castle. So Ludwig was never married, which was a scandal in his day, and he became more and more reclusive and became more and more fixated on Richard Wagner's Tristan and Isolde. The castle's interior was so ornate, they did not allow us to film inside, but all of the motifs have allusions to the story of Tristan and Isolde, and the very name of the castle, Neuschwanstein, which means New Swan Rock. They referred to him as the Swan King, and he died under mysterious circumstances at quite a young age. Over the years, he has been called the Mad King, but in today's society, we may just see a very sensitive individual who struggled to conform to the rigid expectations of his culture. We continued to hike on the trails in the forest behind the castle. I saw these spring flowers peeking out from the forest floor and wanted to capture that in my art journal. We headed to the bus and back to our hotel for an early night and an early flight home. And that concluded our trip to Germany. So I hope you enjoy coming along this journey with me. An incredible trip, and I really do hope to travel again with students. And I hope this inspires you to take your students to another country, to show them history and art in person in the places where these events happened. There's really nothing like it. I think one of the best parts of this trip were the conversations that we had with students, often after we went on tours, and just hearing connections they were making from visiting these places. There's really nothing like it, and it was very invigorating. So if you're a teacher who has always dreamed of doing this, look around, try to find an opportunity, because it was really worthwhile. And it took me 17 years of teaching to do this sort of thing, so it's really never too late. I also hope that you will try out art journaling or travel journaling, because this was a wonderful way to reflect on the trip, to find quiet moments, to make art during the trip, and to really document the trip in a visual way. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in another video real soon.